For years, Linux existed quietly in the background of the tech world. Most people had heard the name, but very few truly understood what it was or why it mattered. To the average computer user, Linux was often seen as something only programmers, hackers, or highly technical people used. Windows dominated desktops. Apple controlled the premium ecosystem. Linux remained hidden in the shadows, powering servers, running internet infrastructure, and silently keeping the digital world alive without demanding attention. But something has started to change, and the shift is becoming impossible to ignore. The rise of Linux is no longer loud, dramatic, or explosive. It is silent, steady, and incredibly powerful. Unlike many technology trends that appear overnight and disappear just as quickly, Linux has been growing beneath the surface for decades. Now, in 2026, more people than ever are beginning to realize that Linux is not just an alternative operating system anymore. It is becoming the foundation of modern computing itself. The reason this matters now is because the world is changing rapidly, and many users are questioning the future of the systems they rely on every single day. One of the biggest reasons behind Linux's growth is frustration with traditional operating systems. Over the past several years, users have become increasingly concerned about privacy, forced updates, telemetry, advertising, inside operating systems, subscription models, and hardware restrictions. Many people feel like they no longer fully control the devices they paid for. Modern operating systems have become heavily tied to cloud accounts, online verification systems, and data collection practices. Even basic actions increasingly require internet connectivity or account synchronization for users who simply want a fast, stable, and private computing experience. This direction has created growing dissatisfaction. Linux entered this conversation at exactly the right moment. Instead of moving toward more restrictions, Linux distributions have been moving toward simplicity, flexibility, and user control. Modern Linux systems are easier to install than ever before. Desktop environments have become polished and visually appealing. Gaming support has improved dramatically. Hardware compatibility has expanded. What once required deep technical knowledge can now often be done through simple graphical interfaces. The barrier to entry that scared people away for years has slowly started disappearing. Gaming, surprisingly, became one of the biggest turning points. For decades, gaming was considered Linux's greatest weakness. Most major games were built exclusively for Windows, and anti-cheat systems often refused to work on Linux entirely. But then Valve changed the game. The introduction of Proton transformed Linux gaming almost overnight. Thousands of Windows games suddenly became playable on Linux with little or no modification. The Steam Deck pushed this even further by placing a Linux-based gaming device directly into mainstream consumers' hands. Millions of players unknowingly started using Linux every day without even realizing it. That moment quietly shattered one of the oldest myths surrounding Linux. Another major factor behind Linux's rise is performance. As modern software grows heavier and operating systems become more resource-hungry, users with older hardware are finding their systems slowing down dramatically. Linux offers an alternative that feels refreshingly efficient. Many lightweight Linux distributions can revive old laptops and desktops that would otherwise become electronic waste. Computers that struggle under newer versions of Windows often run smoothly and responsively with Linux installed. In a world where hardware prices continue rising, the ability to extend the life of existing devices has become extremely valuable. Security is another reason Linux matters now more than ever. Cybersecurity threats are growing rapidly across the world. Ransomware attacks, spyware data breaches, and malicious software are becoming increasingly sophisticated. Linux has long been respected for its security-focused design. Because it is open source, vulnerabilities are often identified and patched quickly by a global community of developers. Linux also gives users far greater transparency into what their systems are actually doing. While no operating system is perfectly secure, Linux offers a level of visibility and control that many users feel is disappearing elsewhere. The open-source nature of Linux may be its most important advantage of all. Unlike proprietary operating systems controlled by a single corporation, Linux is built collaboratively by developers around the world. Anyone can inspect the code, modify it, improve it, or distribute their own version. This creates an ecosystem driven less by profit and more by innovation, experimentation, and community. It also prevents any single company from fully controlling the future of the platform. In an era where technology giants hold enormous influence over digital life, many people see open source as a form of digital independence. The rise of Linux is also deeply connected to the explosion of cloud computing and artificial intelligence. Most of the internet already runs on Linux servers. Major cloud providers rely heavily on Linux infrastructure because of its reliability, scalability, and efficiency. AI systems, machine learning platforms, and supercomputers overwhelmingly use Linux as their operating foundation. Even many Android devices indirectly rely on the Linux kernel. While desktop users may only now be noticing Linux's growth, the reality is that Linux has quietly powered much of the modern digital world for years. What makes this moment especially important is that Linux is no longer confined to technical circles. Creators, students, gamers, privacy advocates, developers, and everyday users are all beginning to explore it for different reasons. Some want freedom from restrictive ecosystems. Others want better performance. Some are interested in learning technology skills. Others simply want an operating system that feels less invasive. The motivations vary, but together they are creating momentum that Linux has never experienced before on the desktop side. Companies are paying attention as well. Hardware manufacturers increasingly provide official Linux support. Major software companies are releasing Linux versions of their applications. Development tools, browsers, communication apps, and productivity software have become far more accessible on Linux than they were even 5 years ago. The ecosystem is maturing rapidly. While Linux still faces challenges, particularly with certain professional software and niche hardware support, the gap is narrowing faster than many expected. The silent rise of Linux also reflects a broader cultural shift happening in technology. People are becoming more aware of digital ownership, privacy, and long-term sustainability. There is growing skepticism toward ecosystems that lock users into subscriptions, closed platforms, or mandatory online services. Linux represents an alternative philosophy. It treats users less like products and more like participants. That distinction resonates strongly in today's environment. At the same time, Linux's diversity is both a strength and a challenge. There are hundreds of Linux distributions, each designed for different audiences and goals. Some focus on beginners. Others target advanced users, cybersecurity professionals, developers, or gamers. This flexibility allows Linux to adapt to nearly any use case, but it can also confuse newcomers who are unsure where to start. However, the growing popularity of beginner-friendly distributions like Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Fedora, and Pop_OS is helping simplify that transition. Another reason Linux matters now is because governments, schools, and organizations are beginning to reevaluate dependence on proprietary software ecosystems. Rising licensing costs, security concerns, and geopolitical tensions have encouraged some institutions to explore open-source alternatives. Linux offers transparency, customization, and independence that can be especially attractive for national infrastructure and education systems. While this shift is gradual, it signals growing recognition of Linux as a strategic technology platform rather than merely a hobbyist system. The future of Linux may not look like a dramatic takeover where Windows or macOS suddenly disappear. Instead, the future may involve Linux quietly becoming embedded everywhere. It already powers servers, smartphones, embedded systems, smart devices, cloud infrastructure, and AI development environments. Desktop adoption may continue growing slowly rather than explosively, but even that gradual growth has enormous implications. Every year, Linux becomes more accessible, more polished, and more capable. What makes Linux unique is that it evolved differently from most modern technology platforms. It was not built around maximizing user engagement, advertising revenue, or ecosystem lock-in. Its development culture prioritizes functionality, transparency, and collaboration. That philosophy feels increasingly rare in the modern tech industry. As users become more aware of how technology shapes their lives, many are starting to appreciate those values more deeply. The silent rise of Linux is not about hype. It is not driven by flashy marketing campaigns or billion-dollar advertising budgets. Most people discovering Linux today are doing so through word of mouth, online communities, YouTube creators, developers, and personal experimentation. That organic growth creates a different kind of momentum. It builds trust gradually instead of relying on short-term excitement. Perhaps the biggest reason Linux matters now is because the world is entering a period where digital freedom, security, and control are becoming central issues. Artificial intelligence is advancing rapidly. Cloud services are becoming deeply integrated into everyday life. Operating systems are becoming more connected, more monitored, and more commercialized. In that environment, Linux stands out as one of the few major platforms that remains fundamentally open and community. The rise of Linux may be silent, but its impact is becoming louder every year. Millions of users are discovering that they do not need to accept every limitation imposed by modern computing ecosystems. They are realizing there are alternatives that prioritize speed, flexibility, privacy, and ownership. Linux may never dominate the desktop market in the traditional sense, but dominance is no longer the point. Influence is an Linux, and Linux already influences nearly every corner of modern technology. What once looked like a niche operating system for enthusiasts is slowly becoming one of the most important foundations of the digital age. But rise is happening quietly, without massive headlines or dramatic announcements. But it is happening nonetheless. And the reason it matters now is simple. As technology becomes more central to human life, the systems that give users freedom, transparency, and control will matter more than ever before.